5. Quit blaming. When Pete and I married, the two of us became one and he was the one. Instead of creating space for both of us to flourish, the marriage created a hole into which I somehow fell and disappeared. It was natural to lose myself in Pete's life. He seemed to know more clearly what he wanted. I went along when Pete wanted to vacation in Nicaragua in the middle of their civil war while I was 6 months pregnant, even though this wasn't my idea of rest and relaxation. I followed Pete to New York City to plant a church. Without parishioners, a facility, or money, even though I wondered if we were better off waiting. I immersed myself in Pete's workaholic pace of life even though I was tired and increasingly lonely. I adopted Pete's strong opinion that I should stay in Queens with our young children during the long, hot summers even though I longed to be with my parents near the beach in New Jersey. As I look back on the many ways I lost myself in Pete's life, I do not blame him. Of course, I did at the time. Although he had blind spots about what was driving his behavior, he was not responsible for my choices. I was fully responsible for allowing Pete to cross so many of my personal boundaries and to ignore my desire for a different kind of life. I mistakenly believed I was powerless to change my many frustrating life situations. The best I could do was to blame Pete and others as life happened to me. The blame game. Blaming, sad to say, has always been with us. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. Sarah blamed Hagar. Joseph's brothers blamed him. The Israelites blamed Moses. Moses blamed God. Saul blamed David. Today, when things don't go our way, we blame our parents, spouses, children, schools, government, corporations, bosses, employees, leaders, weather patterns, inflation, traffic. We blame demonic powers, even God himself when things are really bad. Blaming comforts us, at least for a while, with the illusion that we are in control. However, it actually accomplishes the opposite, stripping us of our God-given personal power and keeping us helplessly stuck in immaturity. Here are examples of comments that demonstrate how we sometimes play the blame game in order to avoid taking responsibility for our lives. You are ruining my life. My boss makes my life miserable. I wish I could work somewhere else. The church is not meeting my needs. I am exhausted because my spouse won't take a vacation. It is because my job doesn't pay enough that I have so much debt. I'm not growing spiritually because the church is so immature. Credit card companies are ruining my life. My relationship with my fiancé is so bad because he won't go to counseling. It's too late for me to change jobs. I'm a single mom. I'll be poor the rest of my life. Whenever I visit my parents for the holidays, they stress me out. I've never been able to do science or math. I had terrible teachers. Blaming statements can give the illusion of helplessness. We mistakenly believe we don't have choices. Yet blaming undermines the blamer in insidious ways. When blamers play the victim, they often retain a sense of moral superiority over others. In doing so, they disown responsibility. We observe this in the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve attempted to gain the upper hand through blaming one another. Blamers are typically angry and preoccupied with what others should be doing rather than facing their own discomfort. This is easier, at least in the short term, than making the difficult choices they face. When we continue to let hurtful situations go on hurting us or accept pain because we have to, we wrongly interpret our lives as out of our control. We think we are victims of our circumstances. As a result, we can often end up depressed. The following are 6 signs that indicate you may be using blame to avoid personal responsibility. 1. You feel you have been dealt a bad hand in life. 2. You don't think you can change anything in your life for the better. 3. You view negative occurrences and relationships in your life as being out of your control. 4. You rarely believe you are wrong. 5. You think apologizing is a sign of weakness. 6. You dwell on the past instead of looking to the future. If you find yourself blaming others and feeling like a victim, it is time to ask an important question: what am I going to do about it? Asking yourself this question shifts the focus from blaming others to taking personal responsibility for your life. Take responsibility for your life. You do have choices. No one is responsible for you and your life but you. If your spouse doesn't want to go out, you can go out on your own. Or with friends. If you hate driving an hour a day to work, look for a new job closer to home or move closer to your job. If parents are difficult to be around and refuse to change, you are free to determine the boundaries of when, how, or even if you want to spend time with them. Maybe your spouse will not go to counseling to work on your marriage, but you can go yourself to work on your own blockages in the relationship. You may be blaming the credit card company for causing you a great deal of stress by calling you multiple times a day. Instead of avoidance, you can locate a financial counselor or organization to create a plan to dig yourself out of your financial hole, learn money management skills, and establish long-term stability. Cynthia has been married to Jackson for 18 years. Throughout their married life, she has cooked all the meals for him and their 3 children. I hate cooking and being responsible for cleaning up after the meals. It's not fair, she complained year after year. She mistakenly assumed it was her duty as a faithful wife. She resented Jackson for this, and it leaked out in sarcastic remarks and distancing. Cynthia was then part of a small group at church where she began to grow and learn about valuing herself. I finally stopped blaming my husband, she told me, because I recognized it was my responsibility to speak up and declare my preferences. I had to be willing to rock the boat if necessary. Actually, Cynthia's husband was more than willing to divide up their cooking and cleanup responsibilities. Cynthia had never asked. This proved to be a simple but profound life lesson for her as she moved from blaming to taking responsibility for her preferences and needs. Michelle carried deep pain because of a difficult sexual relationship with her husband, Bill. If he would just change, she thought, everything would be wonderful. She prayed God would fix him and make things right. It didn't happen. 1 year turned to 5. 5 years turned to 10. Eventually, Michelle lamented, my anger and pain turned into depression until God finally met me. He showed me I was part of the problem, and that our sexual difficulties were a symptom of all the other unhealthiness in our marriage. Michelle made a decision to take responsibility for her own issues, her own happiness, and their need for professional intervention. God did redeem the mess we made of our relationship, she recounted. It took years of courage, honesty, hard work, and taking responsibility for ourselves. But we now enjoy an intimacy and safety in our sexual relationship that I couldn't have imagined when I was begging God to fix him. Her husband later expressed deep gratitude that Michelle had stopped blaming him for their sexual problems and had never given up hope. Discover your God-given personal freedom kit. In the great classic The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion are all looking for something outside themselves to set them free. Dorothy wants to go home, the Scarecrow is looking for a brain, the Tin Man wants a heart, and the Lion is looking for courage. After a long, frustrating journey, they finally arrive at their destination only to make a surprising discovery. The qualities they thought only the wizard could give them were, in fact, qualities they already possessed. They simply needed to be reminded to take the risky step of putting those things to use. Immediately after being told he had a brain, the Scarecrow started making mathematical computations. The Tin Man's ticking heart affirmed the ability he had to love others. The cowardly Lion, after receiving a medal of courage, rediscovered his bravery. And Dorothy realized she had always had the power to go home. Her trials taught her the importance of her family, and she finally chose for herself to go home. No other person could have done that for her. In a similar way, as human persons created in God's image, we are born with certain rights and responsibilities that enable us to walk in God-given personal freedom. Genesis 1:26-31. We don't need, for example, to find someone else to give us permission to make choices, set boundaries, declare preferences, think for ourselves, or feel these abilities are already ours. However, like the characters in Oz, we have to take responsibility for what we've been given and put those things to use. This includes the freedom to take responsibility for choosing our own lives. Personal Freedom Toolkit. After years of working to reclaim the freedom to choose my own life and helping others to do the same, I've developed what I call the Personal Freedom Toolkit. Point 1. This is my adaptation and expansion of a toolkit created by well-known psychologist Virginia Satir. The 9 tools in the kit are essential if we are to quit blaming others and take responsibility for our own lives. Each tool reminds us of a right or responsibility as human beings made in God's image and as followers of Jesus Christ. The following list gives you an overview of these simple but life-changing tools. They are easy to learn but challenging to practice. These tools include the fence of separateness, practice boundaries. The voice of declaration, speak up. The yes/no medallion, say yes or no. The heart of feelings, pay attention to feelings. The oxygen mask of self-care, take care of yourself. The mirror of self-confrontation, confront yourself. The key of hope, remain hopeful. The hat of wisdom, think carefully. The badge of courage, be courageous. 1. The fence of separateness. Fences are boundaries, they enable us to know where our yard ends and our neighbor's yard begins. In the Bible, boundaries are evidenced from the beginning of creation. To bring order out of chaos, God separates the earth from the sky, the water from the land, night from day. God also created human beings with boundaries. The word existence comes from a word meaning to stand apart. Point 2. Before there were 2 people in the garden, there was one. Adam and Eve each had an identity as a unique human being apart from the other. Their identities as separate individuals were crucial for their healthy togetherness. In the same way, God gives us boundaries so we know where we end and others begin. These boundaries include our own thoughts, feelings, hopes, dreams, fears, values, and beliefs. These things set us apart, reminding us of our separateness as individuals. When I let someone, for example, pressure me into doing something I don't agree with or don't want to do, I allow my boundaries to be crossed. Skin is an example of an important personal boundary. Your skin and everything in it belongs to you and no one else. You are in charge of your body, whether you are married or single. You are to respect it and make sure that others respect it. Far too many people, especially women, allow the boundary of their skin to be violated. If someone crosses your skin boundary in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, you have the right and responsibility to say no. In addition to establishing and enforcing our own boundaries, we must respect the boundaries of others. We do this by valuing differences. When our opinions or ideas are different, we must respect the choices others make, even if they are vastly different than ours. We do not belittle or demonize them. We violate the fence of separateness when we tell people what they should think and feel. We utter boundary-crossing statements such as, "That's ridiculous, how could you think that? You shouldn't be angry. I can't believe you liked that movie. You don't care about me. That's why you don't call me." The fence of separateness is a simple but powerful tool that enables us to respond differently in situations that used to make us feel helpless. Instead of being afraid to speak up and assert ourselves, or losing ourselves in someone else's life, we claim our freedom as distinct individuals and express our own thoughts and feelings. Now, when we feel disrespected at work, instead of just allowing it to happen, we may say, "Mr. Jones, I don't appreciate it when you correct me in front of others. I would prefer that you speak to me in private." If you have difficulty establishing boundaries, perhaps you never saw them modeled or practiced. You may have experienced sexual, physical, or emotional abuse in your home growing up. Establishing a fence of separateness will require God's power, a near heroic level of courage, and support from others. Get help. You can learn this. You are worth it. Remember, if people cross our boundaries, it is because we allow it. No one but you is responsible to ensure your boundaries are respected. 2. The voice of declaration. This tool is indispensable for asserting your God-given separateness. By voice I mean our ability to speak on our own behalf, to be able to tell others what we think and feel. Declaring oneself is challenging for those who grew up with unspoken rules that said something like, it's not polite to ask for what you want or need, or don't say anything unpleasant out loud. Perhaps your father taught you not to swear but swore himself. The unspoken rule in your home was, don't talk about dad's hypocrisy. Or maybe you were not allowed to mention a parent's excessive drinking or rage or depression. Nobody was to talk about it. You learned that using your voice, speaking your truth out loud, was dangerous. Now that you are an adult, however, there isn't anyone else but you who can articulate your wants and needs or speak your truth. No one is an expert on you but you. If you don't voice your needs, preferences, and what is important to you, no one else can or should. You alone are responsible for being clear, honest, and respectful in declaring yourself. It's important to note that when you speak on your own behalf, you are not speaking against others but for yourself. Sometimes we think that people who do not agree with us are against us. This is not true. They merely have a different opinion. If I disagree with your convictions about global warming, the economy, or gay marriage, my purpose is not to be antagonistic or difficult. I am simply being true to my own values and convictions. If I tell Pete I prefer time alone this evening, it is not against him. I love and enjoy his company. I simply must first recharge my emotional batteries in order to love him well. If I say no to your invitation to a movie, it is nothing personal. I prefer to stay home and rest my tired body. Declaring my own needs and preferences is something I still have to work at. I recently used a gift certificate to enjoy a therapeutic massage, one of my favorite ways to relax and take care of myself. During the massage, I began to experience pain in my shoulder because of the awkward position of my head and neck. When I asked the massage therapist for a pillow to raise my head, she suggested I wait a few minutes until after she finished massaging my neck. However, when the pain worsened, I asserted myself more strongly, please, I need a pillow. I am in a lot of pain. As the massage continued, I realized the therapist wasn't applying the deep pressure I needed in order to release the tension in my neck and shoulders. I thought to myself, do I dare assert myself a third time? I don't want to be a complainer. Then I said to myself, no, Jerry, you have a right to declare yourself. This massage is a gift you want to enjoy and she's being paid for her work. I did ask for more pressure, which the therapist was more than happy to give, but it was another reminder of how difficult it can be, even in everyday situations, to pull the voice of declaration out of the toolbox. Our daily lives are filled with opportunities and challenges to declare ourselves or to shrink back out of fear or guilt. For example, I prefer to sit in a different spot at the restaurant than where we are seated. We won't be traveling to your home this Christmas. We have chosen to stay home. I don't like it when you drive above the speed limit around curves. I don't feel safe. I value the environment, so I am going to stop buying bottled water for our family. I'd like to pause. I don't think this haircut is turning out the way I expected. I would like to ask you not to check your email while we are in a meeting. I do not want to go to that event. I prefer to stay home. What exactly is the salary and benefits package for this job? Is that negotiable? When we use our voices to declare ourselves, we are not trying to control or manipulate others. We are speaking with an attitude of deep respect both for ourselves and others. Our words don't carry anger or a defensive tone. We also use our voice to make comments or express puzzlement about things that are confusing. We have the right to ask hard questions even when it is uncomfortable. God has a voice. He speaks. As God's child, made in His image, you too have a voice and are called to use it in loving yet powerful ways. It is your voice of declaration, and you can't live your unique, God-given life without it. 3. The yes/no medallion. 2 words are especially important in the personal freedom toolkit, yes and no. Both words are powerful, and both pose unique challenges. Many of us feel guilty saying no. We want to be liked and not disappoint people, and perhaps we imagine that saying no is somehow less than Christ-like. But consider Jesus' example and whether or not he disappointed people. He said no to the crowds who wanted to make him king, John 6:14, 16. He said no to Peter who wanted him to avoid the cross, Matthew 16:21, 23. He said no to the religious leaders who wanted him to stop claiming to be the Messiah, John 9:35, 39. He said no to his family who wanted him to return home, Mark 3:31, 34. He said no to the people who wanted him to come down off the cross to prove he was the Son of God, Luke 23:35, 39. If Jesus did not say no because of a fear of disappointing people, he would not have fulfilled the mission and the purpose God gave him. He would have lived up to other people's expectations instead of his own. Exercising a healthy no is essential if we are to fulfill the Father's destiny for our own lives as well. It's important to understand that both yes and no are loving words. Remember, when I say no, it is not against you but for me. And while my no may make you sad, it doesn't make me bad. Most importantly, if I say yes when I prefer to say no, I erode my integrity and hurt both of us. Saying no, when appropriate, is the right of every adult. No, I can't help you today. No, I can't watch the kids this Saturday. No, I won't be coming over this week. No, I won't be accepting your invitation this time. No, I don't want to give your friend a ride home tonight. We must be able to say no if we are to say a healthy yes. A healthy yes comes from a sincere heart that both desires and is able to do something. It is infused with delight, without strings attached, and absent of any resentment. Yes, feel free to call me anytime today. Yes, I'm happy to give you a ride to the store. Yes, I will be glad to drive to the conference. Yes, I look forward to being with you tomorrow night. Yes, I can watch your children so you can get some time alone. Imagine wearing the yes/no medallion around your neck this week. As you are presented with choices and decisions, take the medallion in your hand, turning it to yes or no, whichever is the right choice for you. For the heart of feelings. The heart tool reminds me that I need to take regular time to pay attention to the feelings going on inside me. They are important indicators and ways that God comes to me. The events, people, and things that excite emotion in me are part of what makes me a unique human being. When I am aware, for example, of what gives my soul joy in life, I am more apt to assert myself and pursue those things that bring me pleasure and joy. I paid attention to my anger when Pete accepted phone calls during dinner. Instead of using my anger to blame him, you don't spend time with me and the kids. I listened to it and recognized it for what it was, a warning that something I valued was being violated. I was then able to assert myself, Pete, I'd like you to silence your cell phone during dinner so we can have uninterrupted family time. Using this tool means I acknowledge my disappointments and sadness. This can range from disappointment with poor food at a restaurant on a special night out, to the disillusionment when not hired for a highly sought-after job appointment. For years I carried the faulty belief that to be disappointed was to be ungrateful, and to be ungrateful was to be bad. Chronic complaining projects anxiety outward toward others. I learned, however, that admitting disappointment humbly reveals and opens our hearts. It involves vulnerability, not entitlement, creating an atmosphere in which God opens our hearts and meets us. Using the Heart of Feelings tool also involves acknowledging my happiness. One summer I was flooded with energy and joy as I stepped out of our car into a family resort camp in the mountains for our vacation. For the next week, I reveled in hiking, swimming, sailing, kayaking, watercolor lessons, beauty, and being with family. My deep joy alerted me to changes I wanted to make in both our vacations and our lifestyle. Spend time each day asking yourself, how am I feeling? What am I angry about? Sad about? Anxious about? Glad about? Journal. And then ask, how is God speaking to me through these feelings? 5. The oxygen mask of self-care. When traveling on a plane with a child, you are instructed that in the unlikely event of an emergency, you are to put on your own oxygen mask before helping a child with theirs. Why? Because she who is not breathing herself cannot help anyone else. A famous proverb puts it this way: she who is not happy cannot help very many people. In other words, I must first take care of myself if I want to provide care to others. Applying the oxygen mask of self-care means doing things that refresh you and give you life. This means being in touch with your wishes and dreams, the things that cause you to feel fully alive. As author Parker Palmer has asked, is the life I am living the same as the life that God wants to live in me? It is easy to live a life other than your own, to slip into meeting other people's expectations for your life. Over time, this slowly erodes the time available for you to spend on your own life. Are you only spending time doing things others want you to do? Or do you regularly include activities that you love to do? Pete and I have been at New Life Fellowship Church in Queens, New York City, for over 25 years. From the first day of the church until now, we have been surrounded by a sea of needs. When asked, how have you two survived? My answer is, we love the people, and our service is an act of love for Christ. At the same time, we know we are dispensable and are intentional to put on the oxygen mask of self-care. We did not do good self-care the first 8 years and almost self-destruct as a result. This journey into emotionally healthy spirituality has helped us to discover both an inward and outward balance to our life. Pete and I are committed to the Sabbath. We take a 1-day Sabbath each week, a 1-month Sabbath each summer, and a 3 to 4 month Sabbath/sabbatical every 7 years. During these Sabbath rhythms we pursue the things that give us life. Hiking, music, reading, exploring new places, biking, eating at ethnic restaurants, nature, the beach, and being with our extended family and 4 girls. The oxygen mask that gives you fresh air may include attending concerts, gazing at the stars through a telescope, participating in a book club, playing on a sports team, throwing clay on a pottery wheel, working with wood, gardening, fishing, cooking, participating in extreme sports, writing poetry, making art, quilting, or simply being with friends. The question is, are you pursuing those things that breathe life into you and help you to feel fully alive? Can you cease all your work 1 day a week to focus on what gives you life? Consider setting aside 1 day when you eliminate all shoulds and have tos in order to rest and delight in God's gifts to you and around you. 3. 6. The mirror of self-confrontation. We need this tool to protect ourselves from self-deception. Jeremiah 17:9. Placing ourselves before the mirror of self-confrontation means humbly acknowledging our shortcomings and the ways in which we are responsible for our own failures and disappointments. This is what Jesus was talking about when he taught that we must take the log out of our own eye before taking the speck out of someone else's. Matthew 7:1, 5. We prefer to blame rather than take responsibility. I blamed Pete for how unhappy I was about spending summers in New York City. When I finally placed myself before the mirror of self-confrontation, I realized it was easier to blame Pete than to risk making him angry by choosing to spend summers without him at my parents' beach house. Blaming him for my unhappiness allowed me to avoid facing my fear of his disapproval. At the time, it was a fear that felt worse than death. When I finally took this log out of my own eye, I was able to exert my personal freedom to take care of my needs. I stopped blaming Pete, took responsibility for my happiness, and started spending time at my parents' home even if my decision didn't initially meet with Pete's approval. Self-confrontation may sound like a scary tool, and it does raise fears, but it is also a powerful tool that gives you the ability to face your own monsters head-on. It enables you to stop blaming and take back your life. In everyday life, self-confrontation may mean you stop blaming your employer for your unhappiness and begin to face your fear of looking for a different job. You stop complaining about your adult child's irresponsible money management and acknowledge that you do more harm then good when you keep lending him or her money. You stop blaming your parents for being so demanding. Knowing the real issue is your inability to say no when they ask you to keep solving their problems. You stop blaming the church for being so demanding and contributing to your burnout. Instead, you embark on the difficult path of looking inward to discern why you have difficulty setting appropriate, healthy boundaries. You stop blaming others for your poor presentation at work, admitting you were too prideful to ask for help beforehand, and too afraid to invite feedback afterward. If we fail to make good use of this tool, we will never live into the God-given freedom to choose our own lives. Pope John Paul II put it this way: truth and freedom either go hand in hand or together they perish in misery. We cannot achieve full personal freedom without full personal truth. Think back over your week. Were there moments when you said something you wished you had not? Were there any behaviors or actions you regretted doing? What was going on in your heart? If you could do the week over, what might you do differently? If there is any person that you need to go back and speak to, set a note in your calendar to take that courageous step. Be careful not to beat yourself up. Offer your findings to God, trusting His promise that if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. 1 John 1:9. 7. The key of hope. From the creation of the world, God has always provided hope. It is built into the very fabric of nature's seasons as we observe the cycle of death and newness every winter and summer. The most concrete reminder of the reality that we serve a living God who longs to instill hope in His children is grounded in the life, death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus. The golden key of hope unlocks this truth and releases us from the prison of living in the past. Living without hope is like trying to drive a car forward while looking only in the rearview mirror. Focusing too much on the past prevents us from looking ahead to the future. When life becomes difficult, it is easy to become stuck in cycles of negative thinking. I will never let that happen again, we say to ourselves. And we expend all our energy thinking about what we don't want. The key of hope points us to the more important question: what do I want? This frees us to take responsibility for a better future that, in cooperation with the Holy Spirit, we can create for ourselves. Moreover, it keeps us from getting stuck in regrets, resentments, and blaming others. Hope opens doors that we may think are locked but are not. For example, as a pastor's spouse, there have been many times when I lost hope that we would ever have an enjoyable and sustainable life. I wrongly believed that past patterns would simply continue into the future and that there was nothing I could do about it. But that was not true. The gospel offers hope not just for heaven but for this life, here and now. No matter how difficult the past may be, it doesn't mean a better future is impossible. Perhaps your family did not know how to express difficult emotions. You can learn. You don't know how to build trust with people. You can learn. You don't know how to have intimate relationships. You can learn. You don't know how to use your voice to assert yourself in an honest, direct, respectful way. You can learn. You are scared to death of self-confrontation. You can learn to do it and not only survive, but thrive. You avoid conflict at all costs. You can learn to confront it without fear. You can pursue a desirable future, getting the necessary training you need to make healthy changes in your life. You can learn. Christ invites us to place our hope in His power to redeem even the most difficult circumstances, and He invites us to participate with Him in creating a positive future. The past does not have to be the future. What doors do you believe to be closed today? How might you insert the key of hope into that situation to start moving out of the past into a better future? And who might be a mature person whom you can approach in order to share your perspective and encourage you with loving, honest feedback? 8. The head of wisdom. God gives us the ability to live wisely and not foolishly. The entire book of Proverbs extends God's invitation to us to put on the head of wisdom. God invites us to search for insight and understanding as if searching for hidden treasure. Proverbs 2:3-4. Although wisdom involves many things, I want to focus on the vital importance of the wisdom we put into practice when we think ahead and make informed decisions by anticipating potential consequences. The wisdom of anticipating consequences requires careful thinking about short and long-range decisions. In other words, we don't go blindly into things or make impulsive decisions. Scripture calls this quality prudence. The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. Proverbs 14:15. This applies to all kinds of decisions, whether buying a used car, pursuing a relationship, making a career change, agreeing to a new commitment, accumulating credit card debt, or buying something we don't need that happens to be on sale. You enthusiastically purchase a used car because it was the right price. Within 1 month the car breaks down and needs costly repairs. Now you realize you should have brought it to a car mechanic to assess it before buying it. When we practice such prudence and foresight, we take responsibility for our lives and futures. In the early years of our ministry, we rapidly expanded the church by adding more services and planting new churches. We didn't think through the implications of this expansion on staff marriages, our personal relationships with God, or our capacity to provide pastoral care to so many additional people. As a result, we made promises we couldn't keep and then made more unwise and quick decisions out of fear and anxiety. Had we slowed down and anticipated the potential consequences of our decisions, we might have avoided a great deal of hardship and disappointment. Many people avoid thinking too much about the potential consequences of a decision out of fear about what they may discover. For example, you decide to leave your current job for another that offers more money. But you didn't anticipate the long, difficult commute, rising gas prices, longer hours, and the expense of new clothes appropriate for this new position. After a few months, you realize you are now taking home less money than your previous job. In hindsight, you may say, if I had only thought of that before, or it seemed like such a good idea at the time. The head of wisdom gives us the right and the responsibility to pause, gather information, and then to evaluate what we know about an issue. It requires us to think critically before making decisions, recognizing that giving thought to our ways is both a privilege and a gift from God. Identify a poor decision you made in the past. What do you wish you had done differently? What do you regret? What do you now realize? How can you apply those lessons to a current situation you are facing today? 9. The badge of courage. The badge of courage enables us to take healthy risks. This tool is powerful because it is forged in flames of God's love for us. We can be courageous because we don't have to prove our worth to earn God's love. As a result, we can take risks and do the sometimes uncomfortable and difficult things required to grow up into emotionally and spiritually mature adults. Taking hold of personal freedom requires courage and faith. There are no guarantees that things will not get harder before they get better. You can expect resistance when you begin to challenge unhealthy patterns and shed your false self. You are entering a fiery furnace that will burn out of you all that is inauthentic, illusionary, and pretentious. Choosing an authentic life does not mean choosing an easy life. These decisions are difficult and involve pain. The question is whether the pain you choose will be redemptive or destructive. Redemptive pain demands that you die to the right things so you can move closer to your destiny. Destructive pain never leads to anything but more pain, it simply recycles the same problems over and over. Putting on the badge of courage enables you to consider all the tools in the personal freedom toolkit. Take the badge of courage and look back over each tool, reflecting on the following questions. Fence of separateness, where do you allow your boundaries to be crossed? The voice of declaration, when do you have difficulty speaking up? The yes/no medallion, to whom do you find it difficult to say no? The heart of feelings, which feelings do you avoid? The oxygen mask of self-care, where are you failing in self-care? Mirror of self-confrontation, where are you skimming on truth? The key of hope, in what area of your life do you think things will never change? The head of wisdom, in what area of your life are you being impulsive and not asking difficult questions? The badge of courage, For which one of these tools do you need the most courage? When we quit blaming and utilize our God-given personal freedom, our sense of helplessness evaporates. We realize we are not responsible for other people's choices, they are. We can't change others, but we can change ourselves with God's grace. This leads to the question of how we care about others and serve them while at the same time allowing them to mature and take responsibility for their own burdens. See Galatians 6:2, 4. We will 6. Quit overfunctioning. We overfunction when we do for others what they can and should do for themselves. Overfunctioners prevent people, including themselves, from growing up. The street, however, runs both ways. Wherever you find an overfunctioner, an underfunctioner inevitably follows close behind. Overfunctioning dangerously imperils friendships, marriages, churches, workplaces, and families. I know this well. I was an overfunctioner for many years. A poem entitled, Millie's Mother's Red Dress, by Carol Lynn Pearson demonstrates the toxic fallout of overfunctioning. As Millie's mother lies dying, a beautiful red dress she never wore hangs in her closet. In her last moments, she recounts her regrets and the lessons she learned too late in a conversation with her daughter. Well, I always thought that a good woman never takes her turn. That she's just for doing for somebody else. Do here, do there, always keep everybody else's wants tended and make sure yours are at the bottom of the heap. Maybe someday you'll get to them. But of course you never do. My life was like that, doing for your dad. Doing for the boys, for your sisters, for you. You did everything a mother could. Oh Millie, Millie, it was no good. For you, for him. Don't you see? I did you the worst of wrongs. I asked nothing for me. When the doctor told your father, he took it bad, came to my bed and all but shook the life right out of me. You can't die. Do you hear? What'll become of me? It'll be hard, all right, when I go. He can't even find the frying pan, you know. I look at how some of your brothers treat their wives now. And it makes me sick, 'cause it was me that taught it to them. And they learned. They learned that a woman doesn't even exist except to give. Can't even remember once when I took myself downtown to buy something beautiful for me. Except last year when I got that red dress. Oh, Millie, I always thought if you take nothing for yourself in this world, you'd have it all in the next somehow. I don't believe that anymore. I think the Lord wants us to have something here and now. I passed up my turn for so long. I would hardly know how to take it. Do me the honor, Millie, of not following in my footsteps. Promise me that. Point 1. Millie's mother realized at the end of her life that she served neither her family nor herself well. She overfunctioned at the expense of her own soul. Her family underfunctioned, stunting their growth into maturity. She did for them what they could and should have done for themselves. At the end of her life, all she had was painful regrets about the harm she had done. Stepping out from the bottom of the heap. Can you relate to Millie? I can. For years I put myself at the bottom of the heap. I too was doing for everybody else, always putting myself last. I was the primary parent for our daughters. I took care of our home. I paid the bills. I managed our schedules. I planned yearly holidays and days off. I created special occasions for our family. I did birthdays and monitored all medical and dental appointments. I did all the cleaning, cooking, laundry, and shopping. I entertained groups from our church weekly and overnight guests monthly. I lived as if I were Superwoman, doing the work of 3 people. Pete was an underfunctioner at home because he was an overfunctioner at work. He did the job of 3 people at our church. He lived as if he were Superman. This created large gaps at home that I filled. In fact, my overfunctioning at home made it possible for Pete to overfunction at church. I ended up doing for Pete, as well as our daughters, many things they could and should have been doing for themselves. I grew tired, weary, and resentful. This leaked out in sarcasm and complaining. That didn't change our situation very much. Pete may have taken the kids to an after-school soccer game, but he was still On the phone. As I began my journey into emotionally healthy spirituality, I realized I was the problem, not Pete. If I wanted Pete to stop underfunctioning at home, I needed to stop overfunctioning. I could no longer shield Pete from the consequences of his underfunctioning as a husband, as a father, and as a member of our family. If Pete didn't step up, then perhaps our daughter would not play in the local soccer league. If Pete didn't want to prepare a guest room, then there wouldn't be any more overnight guests. I discovered everyone in my family could each do their own laundry, including Pete. I also realized I wanted to renegotiate expectations around parenting. I did not want to be the primary parent. I wanted Pete to share an equal burden in carrying the anxiety and weight of our children's needs emotionally, academically, physically, and spiritually. I also did not want to cook 7 nights a week. Pete was capable of learning how to prepare food and taking responsibility for dinner 2 nights a week. And it wasn't all smooth sailing. I can assure you, my family especially. My Italian-American mother-in-law was not cheering me from the sidelines. Pete was forced to face his own overfunctioning role at church, an underfunctioning role at home. He wasn't happy about it at least at first, especially when it came to cooking and laundry. Over time, however, he learned a few things. In the short term, the quality of our meals declined significantly. I didn't mind as long as there was food on the table at 6 p.m. and I didn't have to think about how it got there. Pete was less upset with the changes than our daughters. Their anxiety came out as anger. Mothers are supposed to do the cooking. "You're mean," yelled Faith. Eva complained, "Dad's cooking is horrible. I'm starving to death." She was right about Pete's cooking. He had a lot to learn. But I remained resolute and calm, determined to achieve some balance in my life. Despite some initial resentment, Pete came to realize how much he loved co-parenting. In the beginning of taking on more responsibilities at home, Pete continued to do the jobs of 3 people at church. But now he was dropping a lot of balls at work. He soon realized how much he was overworking at the church. Pete changed the way he functioned at church. He could no longer launch new initiatives without taking into account his responsibilities at home. He slowed down the church, eliminating, for example, large events and outreaches that absorbed enormous energy and time. God-given limits and boundaries became part of his vocabulary. Pete reordered his priorities at church and learned to say no to events that impacted his new commitments to our marriage and family, even if it disappointed some people. Interestingly, the church grew and flourished as he made these changes. Overfunctioning inventory. Let me repeat, overfunctioning is doing for others what they can and should do for themselves. Overfunctioning is more than simply a bad habit. It is a weed whose deep roots can often be traced back through generations in your family of origin. And the thorny branches of that weed reach far out into our workplaces, parenting, marriages, churches, and friendships. Overfunctioning is not an all-or-nothing kind of condition. It exists on a continuum that ranges from mild to severe. Use the simple assessment below to get an idea of where you fall on the continuum. Place a checkmark in the boxes next to the statements that describe you. I generally know the right way to do things. I move in quickly to advise or fix things lest they fall apart. I have difficulty allowing others to struggle with their own problems. In the long run, it is simply easier to do things myself. I don't trust others to do as good a job as I can. I often do what is asked of me, even if I am already overloaded. I don't like to rock the boat, so I cover for others' shortcomings. Other people describe me as stable and as always having it together. I don't like asking for help because I don't want to be a burden. I like to be needed. If you checked 3 or more boxes, you may be overfunctioning. If you checked 4 to 7 boxes, you probably have a moderate case of overfunctioning. If you scored 8 or above, you are in trouble. The 5 deadly consequences of overfunctioning. It's easy, and perhaps tempting, to discount the damage done to ourselves and others because of overfunctioning, but it's no small matter. There are at least 5 deadly consequences of this behavior. It breeds resentment, perpetuates immaturity, prevents us from focusing on our life's calling, erodes our spiritual life, and destroys community. Point 2. Overfunctioning breeds resentment. Perhaps you recall the story of Mary and Martha from Luke 10. Martha, in classic overfunctioning mode, is completely caught up in the demands of preparing an important meal for some very distinguished guests, Jesus and his 12 disciples. Among other things, her to-do list includes harvesting or shopping for ingredients, setting a large table, prepping food, borrowing mats, tables, and serving plates from the neighbors, cleaning the house, hiring a musician for the right background music, serving the meal, cleaning up the meal, and, perhaps most importantly, making sure that everything goes perfectly. But even when preparations seem to be going well, Martha is angry and resentful, especially at her sister Mary, who sits enjoying the company of Jesus. Martha is too angry to enjoy Jesus herself. Martha's overfunctioning is cloaked in the guise of caring for the needs of others. However, in trying to accomplish too much, she not only loses sight of herself but of the very purpose of all her hard work to welcome and care for her guests, including Christ himself. Martha confuses caring about someone with having to take care of them. I relate to Martha, more than I want to admit. For most of my Christian life, what I misunderstood as caring was actually taking more responsibility for people than God was asking me to. This included everything from babysitting people's children and providing transportation to giving away money, offering my teenage children advice when they weren't asking for it, ironing Pete's shirts when he could do it himself, and being readily available for other people's crises. On one occasion, Pete invited 2 well-known Christian leaders from out of town to come to our home for lunch. As usual, I worked extremely hard to present a perfect-looking home and exhausted myself cooking an elaborate meal. Beginning 2 days ahead, I prepared homemade clam chowder, homemade bread with cheese, and a killer homemade chocolate cake. And all of this was done with a baby on my hip and a toddler tugging at my leg. Sadly, I believed that my exertions themselves meant I was caring for these people. But like Martha, I was tired, cranky, and stressed out with those around me. "I'm sick and tired of this," I complained. "Why doesn't anybody help me?" When one of Pete's lunch guests casually remarked he wasn't hungry and nonchalantly pushed away his plate, I was devastated. How could he not appreciate my hard work? I protested to Pete in private. It wasn't until years later that I began to realize I could care for people without overfunctioning. I knew I had turned a corner one evening in particular when we hosted another overnight guest. I straightened the house, but I didn't clean it immaculately. I served a simple, not elaborate, dessert. I let my kids be themselves. After dinner, we settled down in the living room with coffee. I sat and mostly listened as our guest, a fellow pastor, poured out his heart. I remember being aware of Christ's presence. If one of the kids needed something, I let Pete jump up and get it. When the dishes piled up in the sink, I let them be. I was able to be truly present with myself, with Pete, and with our guest. I thought back to Jesus' beautiful invitation to Martha. "You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one." Luke 10:41-42. And I began to realize that this invitation was also for me. Overfunctioning perpetuates immaturity. Moses was an overfunctioning leader who mistakenly believed his self-sacrifice helped his people. Day and night he sat before long lines of disgruntled folks trying to settle the seemingly endless disputes that arose among them. He was so overwhelmed and exhausted that it never occurred to him there might be a better way. It took an outside person, his father-in-law, Jethro, to point out the obvious: what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you, you cannot handle it alone. Exodus 18:17-18. Moses' life changed dramatically when he followed Jethro's advice and appointed judges to hear most of the disputes. Until he allowed others to take up their legitimate responsibilities, Moses himself was the largest obstacle preventing the healthy growth and maturity of his people. But old habits die hard. Later, in Numbers 11, the Bible describes how Moses' overfunctioning gets him in trouble again when the people of Israel blame him for their unhappiness with the food rations. They didn't want to struggle with learning to trust God's promises. Instead, they demand a rescue from their pain, and Moses readily accepts the role of superhero and takes full responsibility to save them. Unfortunately, in doing so, he not only engages in self-destructive behavior but also ensures the ongoing immaturity of his people. The question Moses needed to ask himself way back when is the same one we need to ask ourselves today. Do we really love others? Well, when we don't require our children to consistently carry age-appropriate responsibilities in the home because we don't want to deal with their resentment and bad attitudes. We protect someone we love from feeling inadequate or insecure by discouraging them from taking healthy risks for growth and achievement. We fulfill all the tasks needed for a successful small group or ministry, prepare our home to host the meeting, prepare materials, lead the group, provide refreshments, clean up, recruit and follow up with newcomers, pray, meet special needs of group members, plan small group outings, and train an apprentice, and don't encourage others to take responsibility. We allow church to become a spectator sport in which a few carry the weight of responsibility for the many. The lie that overfunctioning whispers in our ears is this: you are the only thing holding everything together. If you stop, things will fall apart. Actually, the opposite is true. The more we overfunction, the more others are demotivated to make changes. If we let go of our overfunctioning ways, God's work will prosper in them, in you, and, ultimately, in many others. If we don't, we almost guarantee that those around us will remain in immaturity. If an underfunctioner is going to take responsibility, we who overfunction must cease from saving, fixing, or advising. Growing up in any area of life is challenging, whether financially, spiritually, emotionally, or relationally. Few underfunctioners will make the first move because the benefits they receive are too satisfying, at least in the short term. Somebody else bears the weight and responsibilities, so they don't have to. To step away from what others can and should do for themselves initially appears harsh, but it is actually a loving act. Overfunctioning prevents you from focusing on your life's calling. At the end of his life, Jesus said to God, "I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do." John 17:4. It is doubtful we will be able to say such a thing ourselves at the end of our lives if we are overfunctioners. God had a plan for Christ's short earthly life, and he has a plan for your life and mine. However, if we are focused too much on others, we will be easily sidetracked and miss out on the unique calling God has for us. When we overfunction in service to others, we often underfunction for ourselves. We lose sight of our own values, beliefs, and goals, which is precisely what happened to Moses. He became so preoccupied with the problems of his people that he lost the focus of his own life's goals. It is sobering to think about what might have happened to Moses and the Israelites if Moses had not been willing to listen to Jethro and stop overfunctioning. Sometimes, like Moses, we are too close to a person or situation to discern if our efforts to provide care are hurting or helping. Would Moses ever have fulfilled his life's calling to get the people to the promised land if he believed he was indispensable to settling all their disputes? As a mother of 4 and the wife of a very active ministry leader, I find it challenging to resist the temptations of overfunctioning. Sometimes it feels as if it's easier to focus on everyone else's needs than it is to take the requisite time, space, and energy to focus on my own life's goals. I must regularly ask myself, am I being faithful to the life God gave me? How am I integrating my role as wife and mother with my own unique passions, talents, and limits so God's unique call on my life doesn't get swallowed up in the demands of ministry and family life? Pete and I have worked together for many years. I normally enjoy it, but there are times when I have to say no to one of his projects because I realize it does not align with my personal goals. In our Earlier years I said yes to everything, and then I grew weary and resentful because not everything Pete believed God was calling him to do was a good fit for me. Reflect on your life for a few moments. Are you so busy focusing on others that you've lost focus on your own needs and goals? In the midst of doing things for others' children, a spouse, friends, relatives, or co-workers, do you routinely make time to ask yourself questions such as these? Am I being the person I want to be in this situation? Am I doing for others what they could and should be doing for themselves? Am I living in line with my values? Is this the work to which God has uniquely called me? What do I want that I am not getting? What result am I getting that I do not want? What am I not doing that I would like to be doing? What am I giving that I don't want to give? What will I do with my time when I stop overfunctioning for others? These are difficult and challenging questions. Each of us lives within the constraints of our marital status, family, and job responsibilities. This requires thoughtfulness and planning. Conversations and consultations with others will be needed for certain decisions. For example, when I decided I wanted to read for half an hour before going to sleep several times a week, I simply carved out time and space to do so. But when I decided to go away for a 3-night retreat or a weekend with friends, I consulted with Pete because it impacted him, our children, and our finances. Nonetheless, there are things that you can change, cut out, or add in order to focus on your God-given life in a healthier way. The key is to remain focused on your own life's direction while remaining in open, clear communication with the other significant people in your life. Overfunctioning erodes your spiritual life. By the time Martha's excessive caretaking reaches its peak, she is giving commands to Jesus, "Tell Mary to help me." Luke 10:40. Her overfunctioning not only prevents her from experiencing Christ's love, it makes her resentful. She believes she knows better than Jesus what Mary, her sister, should be doing. Christ alone is the Savior. We are called to trust and to surrender to His love. When we cross the line and put ourselves in charge of running God's world for Him, we enter into dangerous territory, into the very rebellion of our ancestors, Adam and Eve. I know I am overfunctioning when I think I don't have time to stop and be with God. For this reason, contemplative practices such as Sabbath keeping, silence, and solitude help me to resist this temptation. God, for example, created us to work 6 days and to rest 1. Because of my propensity to overfunction, Sabbaths are essential for me. It's how I intentionally set aside time for God to do the work that only God can do in me and in the world around me. I recall how I felt one Friday afternoon, especially as I prepared for a Sabbath that was to begin at 6 o'clock that evening. I had finished my emails, closed down my computer, folded the laundry, checked off all my errands, returned phone calls, and completed all the church work required in preparation for the following Sunday. The house was in order. As I symbolically turned off the lights on Friday evening to mark the official beginning of my Sabbath, I prayed, "Okay, God, I'm going off duty. You're in charge for the next 24 hours. Something inside of me shifted. I actually breathed a sigh of relief that I didn't have to do anything for the next 24 hours. I was really going to let God be in control of the universe. I was free. What about you? Are you able to accept God's weekly invitation to stop and rest, knowing that He is capable of running the world without you for at least 1 day in 7? Or are you on the Martha plan, overfunctioning to the point that it's become damaging to your relationship with Christ? One of the great signs that you truly believe in God is when you rest in His sovereignty and saving power, and resist the powerful temptation to overfunction. God doesn't want us to overfunction or underfunction. Rather, God invites us to take responsibility for our own lives and not be over-responsible for others. Overfunctioning destroys community. The stories of Moses and Martha provide clear pictures of how overfunctioning negatively impacts communities. When Moses was dealing with the food crisis described in Numbers 11, the community atmosphere became so toxic that Moses despaired of life. "If this is how you are going to treat me," Moses pleads with God, Please go ahead and kill me. Numbers 11:15. And the situation isn't much better with Martha. Imagine you are one of the dinner guests trying to enjoy that great meal with Jesus while Martha stomps angrily around the room, muttering under her breath and staring daggers through her sister. Fun times. If my spouse or teenager is under-functioning and I am over-functioning in maintaining the relationship, my actions distort God's original intention for community. When people function properly according to God's design, there is truth, and relationships are marked by love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Galatians 5:22, 23. When overfunctioning and underfunctioning are present, relationships are marked instead by dissension, conflict, blaming, helplessness, anger, and despair. Author Ed Friedman describes the negative relational impact of overfunctioning this way. When one overfunctions in another's space, it can cause disintegration of the other's being. 3. I like the word disintegration because it refers to inhibiting the growth and maturation of a person's God-given sense of self. Overfunctioners actually believe they know what is best for everyone. In doing so, they invade and limit the development of others. This occurs when a parent of a 14-year-old makes that child's decisions to protect them from the world. The parent organizes the child's free time, chooses extracurricular activities, picks out clothing, and maybe even arranges friendships. Adult children are stunted in their growth when they live at home but do not contribute emotionally or financially. Employers discourage initiative and creativity when they move in quickly to rescue employees rather than allow them to struggle with their own problems. Church leaders and members who always serve and fill in empty slots for volunteers, without sharing their own limits and weaknesses, reinforce underfunctioning in others. Healthy community requires that individuals take responsibility appropriate to their age, life stage, gifts, and abilities. It is unlikely the underfunctioners will make the first move. For this reason, the overfunctioners have to face themselves first. Then there is the real possibility that underfunctioners will also embark on the life-changing journey of spiritual and emotional maturity. If you are an overfunctioner, you may not be able to make the underfunctioners more responsible, but you can make yourself less responsible. Minimally, your community will function more authentically, with less frustration, exhaustion, and anger, and distancing that so often accompanies the rescuing and bailing out of others inappropriately. Breaking free from overfunctioning. To quit overfunctioning is easier said than done. The patterns of relating that we create are often fixed and long-standing. We learn overfunctioning by observation and osmosis from our own family. So resistance to breaking free is profound both from within us and without. We tend not to see we have the problem because we are only trying to be helpful. Change can be profoundly difficult and anxiety-producing. To remain calm when you stop overfunctioning requires staying the course throughout these 4 phases. Admit you are overfunctioning, unleash the earthquake, prepare for chaos, and stand firm. Each of these phases thrusts us into deeper levels of maturity in our relationship with God, others, and ourselves. Admit that you are overfunctioning. Overfunctioning comes in many shapes and forms. It can range from sewing a button on your spouse's shirt when they can do it, to repeatedly bailing out your adult children financially. You will need to discern your own unique warning signs. One thing that tips me off that I am overfunctioning is when I begin to believe things will fall apart if I don't do what is needed. I was a stay-at-home mom when my kids were young, but I also worked part-time out of our home during school hours. One year, however, I considered taking a job at the local YMCA working in recreation, a great love of mine. The hours, however, were 3 o'clock to 6 p.m., 3 days a week. Immediately several large obstacles surfaced in my mind. How could I disturb my husband's life? He was already under a lot of pressure. Pete would have to rearrange his schedule in order to pick up our girls from school, drive them to their after-school activities, and prepare dinner. I knew Pete could do it, I just wasn't sure he would, especially 3 days a week. I also expected my children would put up a fight if I disrupted their predictable afternoon routines. All kinds of thoughts ran through my head. Nobody can take care of them like me. I'll mess up Pete's life. This could put him over the edge in stress. The kids will suffer. Things will become disorganized. He's late a lot. They're going to be full of anxiety. Things will fall apart if I do this. That final thought was like a bolt of lightning that brought me back to reality and helped me to recognize that I was slipping into overfunctioning. I knew then that I needed to take that job, regardless of the consequences. Pete and the girls needed to adjust. This was now my opportunity to stop underfunctioning in my own life and do something I enjoyed while simultaneously contributing to our family income. You know you are crossing the line into overfunctioning when you hear yourself saying things like, "We won't celebrate Christmas as a family unless I do it. I'm the only one who can do this right. It is just easier if I do it myself. I'm afraid of their reaction if I ask them to do more." And it is this realization that prepares you for the next phase, to unleash an earthquake. Unleash the earthquake. Introducing change into a relational system is like unleashing an earthquake. It knocks everyone and everything off their feet and may even topple long-standing structures. This change is similar to reclaiming, discovering, and living out your personal integrity. You admit you are overfunctioning and are now ready to disrupt the status quo. The rules of the relationship are about to change. It is no longer business as usual. It is not telling someone else what to do, it is telling them what you are going to do or not do. Few things arouse more anxiety than shifting the balance in a relationship. The underfunctioner experiences increased anxiety and, often, counter moves to re-establish the original unhealthy balance. Yet this moment offers the greatest possibility for everyone involved to cross the threshold into an accelerated season of emotional and spiritual maturing in Christ. The size of the earthquake depends on the level of maturity of those involved, the history of the relationship, and the willingness to avail themselves of outside help if needed. But when you first quit overfunctioning, even in something small, it can feel cataclysmic. After processing my thoughts about taking the job at the YMCA, I told Pete about the job and how much I wanted to take it. I was prepared for him to say that he was not willing to disrupt his life so significantly. In that case, my backup plan was to find alternative childcare. Fortunately, however, he agreed, albeit reluctantly, to the changes the new job would require. That evening we informed the kids about the change. They complained more than I expected. "Dad will forget to pick us up. We'll never make our soccer practices on time." Pete was known to be distractible, so the kids were justifiably nervous about him. "He's always on the phone," they complained. "Dad doesn't know how to take care of us the way you do." I wasn't sure at that point if this was going to work, but I pushed through my doubts. Prepare for chaos. Whenever we differentiate and give up our old ways of behaving and living, we can always expect a reaction from those close to us. Change back, or don't you dare, may be the words you hear. Chaos means the relational system is now operating in unpredictable ways. I have yet to see anyone who stops overfunctioning who makes a change in themselves by becoming their true self in Christ without at least one or two people around them getting upset. When I began my job at the YMCA, I didn't know what was going to happen in our family dynamic. I prepared myself for the unknown. I knew it was important for me to tolerate the discomfort and remain present with why taking this job was important to me. My decision changed a pattern cemented in over 10 years of marriage. While I knew this was a good decision, I struggled with guilt. During the first few weeks of my new job, I was flooded with anxiety every day at 3 o'clock, wondering, did Pete remember to pick the kids up? I imagined them stranded alone in the schoolyard. What was I thinking? I berated myself. This was a bad idea. My stomach knotted. My mind raced through 100 unthinkable scenarios. Then I calmed down and reminded myself that the school wouldn't let a 6- and 9-year-old out alone on a New York City street. The school would call Pete and he would come. He did forget. A couple of times. The kids sat in the principal's office waiting. He had to deal with their anger. Then he had scheduling conflicts. Because of work. He asked me to fill in. I declined. Our agreement was that he would find his own replacement if he had a schedule conflict. It was hard to not solve the problem for him. It was also not unusual for Pete to forget that he was in charge of dinner. More than once I came home in those first few months to a house of hungry, upset children. "We don't like Dad being in charge," they cried. "Mom, you have to quit work and come home." Again. I let them express their feelings, but I didn't quit my job. I assured them this decision was in the best interest of us all, at least in the long run. I stayed the course. They soon adjusted beautifully. Stand firm. Entrenched relational patterns are strong. You can expect to encounter resistance when you choose to stop overfunctioning. The goal of this phase is to stand firm in your decision. Others are unaccustomed to seeing you in your new role. The awkwardness extends to everyone around you. Allow time for people's perceptions of both you and others to change. For example, before I took the job, I saw myself as indispensable. As time progressed, it became evident I was not. The kids didn't need me all the time. They soon realized, wow, Mom has her own life apart from us. One of my daughters remarked casually, "Gee, who would have ever thought Dad could run the house so well?" Slowly, our family settled into new rhythms. Pete came to enjoy the new experiences he had spending afternoons with our girls. Without interference from me, he discovered that he had his own unique parenting style. This marked the beginning of a move to co-parent our children. Surprising as it was to me, Pete loved it. Our daughters also benefited from spending more time with Pete. In fact, over time, they came to enjoy his parenting style more than mine. They find his easygoing, more flexible style a pleasure. Now, they say, "When are you going away, Mom?" I too learned to relax and enjoy our new rhythm. I actually loved being dispensable. My family didn't need me to hold them together. I appreciated what the girls were receiving emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually as a result of being with Pete. Cooking never became his forte, but I didn't care as long as I didn't have to cook on those nights. Navigating this change provided a kind of template for many other changes in our future. We have learned to operate as a team, with flexible roles that don't become frozen in time. We discuss and agree on changes. I am convinced that if I keep someone from growing up by my overfunctioning, I hurt them. To love and serve others well for Christ's sake demands we discern if we are doing something they can and should be doing for themselves. Our own fears and anxieties strongly pull us to change back, especially in the face of resistance. Yet it is critical to give people time to absorb the changes going on around them. We may want to do something, not because it is best, but simply because we lack the maturity to sit back and wait. Choose one area of your life where you are overfunctioning. It could be work, marriage, friendship, parenting, church, school. Take a few minutes to review the 4 phases. Admit you are overfunctioning. Unleash the earthquake. Prepare for chaos. Stand firm. What might be a practical next step for you today? Offer this to God, asking the Holy Spirit for counsel and courage. Consider talking with a trusted mentor or mature friend. Then step forward into what God reveals to you. When you are willing to quit overfunctioning, you open the door to the next I quit faulty thinking. In this next chapter, we explore the far-reaching implications of what it means to stop believing something is true when it is false. As we will see, to quit faulty thinking leads us to explore the blockages. 7. Quit faulty thinking. 600 years ago, people believed the earth was flat. They were afraid to venture far out into the ocean out of fear they might fall off the earth. For 2,000 years, a process called bloodletting, the withdrawal of large amounts of blood, was used to treat almost every disease from cancer to indigestion to pneumonia. For much of United States history, Native Americans and African Americans were considered inferior, second-class citizens. Less than 100 years ago, women were denied the right to vote. Intellectual activity for women was considered injurious to their delicate female biology. As recently as 1900, at least 99% of the population believed that humans will never fly. Even in 1960, most people believed a person would never walk on the moon. You probably know what I'm going to say next. All of these assumptions were wrong, dead wrong. At the very least, wrong. Beliefs severely limit our ability to experience life and move forward into the future as God intends. At worst, faulty thinking destroys lives and civilizations. Faulty thinking is when we believe something to be true that is false. As Mark Twain once said, it isn't what you don't know that hurts you, it is what you know that isn't so. Faulty thinking is a deadly threat to emotional and spiritual health. It can mire you in powerlessness, paralyze you in hopelessness, fill you with false guilt, cut you off from joyful living, obscure your hope for the future, diminish your capacity for genuine relationships, lock you up in unnecessary pain, limit your God-given potential in Christ. It's also contagious and can spread. This makes faulty thinking even more dangerous because it operates, for the most part, beyond our conscious awareness. Eradicating this deadly disease requires such radical surgery that it can almost be compared to getting a brain transplant. My long journey out of faulty thinking. When Pete and I started our church, we both suffered from acute cases of faulty thinking in several areas, including marriage, parenting, ministry, and spirituality. Our understanding of Christian community is one area in particular that was caught in the clutches of faulty thinking. When we started our church, it included several young families. To combat the loneliness and lack of connection that plagues large urban centers like New York, we all moved into the same neighborhood in order to be intentional about forming a community. In fact, we not only lived in the same neighborhood but in houses attached to one another. Pete and I owned a railroad apartment, which means the rooms were consecutive from the front to the back of the house. In other words, there were no separate hallways, you had to go through one room to get to the next. Since our bedroom also served as the hallway into the backyard, hosting church cookouts required people to parade through our bedroom to get to the backyard. This did not excite me, but I put up with it for the sake of community. We had many fun and meaningful experiences together in those early years as God began to birth something new and exciting. We sought to spend our free time together, raise our kids together, and share goals together. This meant a lot of togetherness a lot. As a community, however, we were crippled by three major factors. The first was that we didn't know how to respect each other's differences. For years I felt guilty over my need for beauty and space. When we moved 8 years later, I felt at fault for wanting to move from our small apartment to a single-family home in a different neighborhood in Queens. The irony is that I myself judged another family when they chose to relocate to a suburban, easier place to live. Not only did we not understand healthy separateness and togetherness, we also did not have a lot of room for complexity, ambiguity, and questions. Our second major problem was the belief that intimate friendships not only could but should always be with people in your church. Churches provide a lovely context for close friendships, but that is very different than the faulty belief that a healthy church community always equals close friendships. Churches as communities serve many purposes. We have a common mission, common values, and a common worship, to name a few. For some, the church community will be a primary source of close friendships. For others, it is not. Because of our faulty belief that community equaled intimate friendship, Pete and I became close friends with the same people we employed, mentored, counseled, and led spiritually. He was the senior pastor and spiritual leader of our church. At times, he was also the supervisor and boss of more than one of our friends. And I was often a team leader and mentor of these same friends. Problems arose when we needed to separate our informal friendships from these other more formal roles. Inevitably, the friendship for us or for our friends was negatively impacted. Relationships were strained and hurt feelings often followed. It took many years, along with a few wise mentors, to uncover the faulty thinking that genuine community always equals close friendships. What we learned is that it is more accurate to state that close friendships do develop in healthy churches and community. That is to be celebrated and encouraged. The problem comes with the word always. I am much more aware of the fragility and danger of dual roles now, especially when one holds a significant leadership role within a church setting. In a dual role, I am both an employer and a friend. Or both your pastor and your friend. Dual roles aren't automatically wrong or inappropriate, though sometimes they can be, but they are complex and require great maturity from both people in order to navigate them well. Point 1. Our third major problem was believing we could live in healthy, close, Christian community without learning key emotionally healthy skills such as listening maturely, speaking honestly, and resolving conflict. We did not have the ability to deal with marital conflicts that spilled over into other contexts, outbursts of anger or frustration in awkward settings, unspoken resentments, and differing expectations. We didn't know ourselves well. How were we going to share appropriately with one another? I highlighted a few areas of my own faulty thinking around community, but there are innumerable ways we engage in faulty thinking in our lives. Each one has vast implications and consequences on how we live out our faith in Jesus Christ in the workplace, our families, and the church. 3 types of faulty thinking. In his book Hand-Me-Down Blues, psychologist Michael Yapko summarizes 3 major types of faulty thinking that distort the way we see life. 1. All-or-nothing thinking. 2. Taking things personally. 3. Thinking things will never change. All 3 of these played a part in the confusion and pain I experienced in building community at New Life. Yet their applications, as we will see, extend into every area of our lives. These distortions are rarely talked about in our churches or addressed in spiritual formation or discipleship training. But when we choose to quit these few simple but destructive distortions, we get unstuck from powerlessness, hopelessness, false guilt, and unnecessary pain. We experience God's promise, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love and self-discipline, 2 Timothy 1:7. With these tools we are empowered to move into the future God has for us. Faulty thinking. 1. All-or-nothing thinking. All-or-nothing thinking exaggerates, it makes things much bigger than they are. When one aspect of life does not go well, all-or-nothing thinking globalizes the experience so it characterizes everything in our lives. All-or-nothing thinking interprets events and circumstances in black and white. There is little room for the gray in life, for nuances, for making the fine distinctions that are so much a part of our lives. All-or-nothing thinking sees the forest but not the trees. For example, a job interview doesn't go well and you think, I'm such a loser. A bad experience with one person who claims to be a Christian leads you to conclude that all Christians are hypocrites. You get A on an exam and decide you are a failure. You buy a car that is a lemon and conclude, I'll never find a good car. Your patience wears thin after a long week and you think, I'm a horrible parent because I screamed at my kids. The discussion in last night's small group meeting was stilted and awkward. You conclude, I'm a bad leader because we didn't have a good discussion last night. After planning a special date for you and your spouse, a rude and inept waiter ruins your meal so that all you can think is, our whole evening is shot. We observe the biblical character Jacob suffering from a classic case of all-or-nothing thinking when he cries out, Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. Genesis 42:36. Good things were happening in Jacob's life, but he could not see them. When this one thing appeared to go wrong, everything, for Jacob, was awful. He wrongly believed his son, Joseph, was dead. And now he believed 2 more sons were going to be lost. His concern was valid. Yet his global thinking that everything is against me was not true. He failed to see the many ways God had blessed him and was about to greatly bless him. He failed to discern that God was working out a larger, long-range plan of saving his family from starvation by moving them to Egypt. In time, their family would form the foundation of the nation of Israel, out of which the salvation of the world would come forth. Our all-or-nothing thinking is a tragedy. We believe something that is untrue and then spread that to others around us. This is where my all-or-nothing thinking about community led me. I wrongly believed biblical community could only look one way. I convinced myself I did not have choices and became overwhelmed. Consequently, I found myself in a low-level depression born out of a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. Consider the following examples of what it looks like to correct a distortion. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. My boss will never change. If God can change me, God can change my boss. I can also develop new strategies for relating to my boss that may help our relationship. The whole church service was ruined today when that cell phone went off during the message. I felt irritated when that cell phone went off, but there were so many other great parts to the service: worship, the message, the fellowship afterward. Men can't be trusted. I was once betrayed by a man, but I know other men who are faithful and trustworthy. I'm a loser because he broke up with me. I have learned some helpful things from the painful end of this relationship, and I am successful in other areas of my life: fitness, work, relationships with my family, and my spiritual life. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. Lawyers are deceitful. There are some dishonest lawyers and some really great ones. She complains about everything. She has areas of her life that are difficult, but she doesn't complain about her job, her appearance, or her parents. I feel totally. I am stressed out about the possibility of not passing an exam at school. But many other areas of my life are not stressed out. Stressed out my relationships, my church, my finances, my good health. When our statements include words like always, all, everybody, or never, these are usually tip-offs that we are engaging in faulty thinking. A simple change in wording can create a major change in us and enable us to reframe a situation differently. When we engage in all-or-nothing thinking, we easily miss the ways God shows up in our lives. Nathanael, when he heard the Messiah was from the small town of Nazareth, replied, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" John 1:46. He made a wrong judgment based on a stereotype. Jesus didn't take it personally or get defensive. Instead, he corrected Nathanael's immature distortion and invited him to follow him and have his eyes opened to many greater things in the future. Faulty thinking 2, taking things personally. We take things personally when we take offense at or take responsibility or blame for something before we have all the data. We are prone to ignore the ambiguity of most situations and rush too quickly to a negative interpretation of events. However, in the vast majority of cases, our interpretation is not based on reality but on stories we tell ourselves. For example, a friend is late for our lunch appointment. She doesn't respect me. I didn't get a raise this year. They must believe I am doing a poor job. I wasn't asked to be in leadership. The pastor must believe I don't have the gifts. I didn't get the job I so desperately wanted. I must be a poor interviewer. My name was not in the credits for the Christmas production. They must have felt my contribution was not important. When we land on a negative interpretation because we don't have all the data, we bring down upon ourselves much unnecessary grief. This wreaks havoc in our relationships, leaving us victims or irresponsible blamers. It is easy to accumulate a bag full of resentments that are based on something untrue. I remember one incident when I was upset and hurt because I did not get invited out to dinner but heard a whole group of friends went. I took it personally, telling myself that they really didn't care about me. Actually, it was a spontaneous lunch that simply happened after I had left for the day. There weren't any formal invitations beyond, "Hey, let's go for lunch." I was offended by something that was an illusion. I wasted energy ruminating over something that wasn't even true. The 9th commandment states, "You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor," Exodus 20:16. Yet we break this commandment when we jump to conclusions about other people that likely are not true. Our resentments often then turn to guilt for our inability to forgive them. And we wonder why so much of our spirituality and community life is so complicated and messy. In any given situation, there are many possible reasons for why things happen the way they do, and there's a good chance that none of them is about you. Consider some examples on the chart below. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. He did not return my phone call or email. He must be upset with me. He may not have gotten the messages. He may have been in a rush and didn't have the time. He may have forgotten or been distracted by other concerns. I was not invited out to the group. Maybe they had to have a working lunch around their project. Perhaps they have their lunch at work. They don't like me. Reasons for not inviting me, and that is okay. They are free to choose. John didn't acknowledge me at church today. He is avoiding me. John may have been distracted or focused on something else and didn't see me. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. I did not get the job. I don't have the ability to get a job in today's market. I didn't get this particular job. Since the boss's nephew interviewed too, he probably did get the job. I can get the training/coaching I need to get a job in today's market. Susan was silent in the small group that I lead. I don't think she likes my leadership. Susan may be very tired or be concerned about a difficulty she's not yet ready to talk about. Much of life is ambiguous and open to interpretation. When we make quick, impulsive judgments, they are often wrong. Mary, Jesus' mother, is a remarkable example of someone who did not take things personally. It is quite moving to ponder her apparent lack of resentment toward Joseph after he planned to divorce her quietly. As far as we know, she had no nasty words for the innkeeper who wouldn't give her a room even though she was 9 months pregnant. Later, when it came time to consecrate the baby Jesus in the temple, Simeon informed her that a sword will pierce your own soul too, Luke 2:35. Rather than be offended or resentful toward this old man's difficult words, as any protective parent might be, the Bible says that Mary pondered and treasured these things in her heart, Luke 2:48-51. We don't know what Mary was thinking, but she could easily have convinced herself, there must be something wrong with me, or there must be something wrong with these people around me. She appears to demonstrate great restraint in not telling herself negative stories about others when she did not understand their actions. Her ability not to take things personally is, perhaps, one of the great secrets of her spirituality. Her relationship with God apparently protected her heart from labeling others as bad or evil for the ways they treated or spoke to her. She did not retaliate when she was misunderstood. We don't observe Mary drinking the spiritual poison of misinterpreting the actions of others. In the same way, when we don't take things personally, it is both a path to and a sign of a genuine spirituality. Faulty thinking 3. Thinking things will never change. This damaging line of thinking relates to your view of the future. If you believe things will never change, you remain deeply rooted in the past. When you assume that you, others, or a situation can change, you have the energy to apply yourself to make changes. Consider how your family of origin approached challenging situations and difficulties. It is likely that you handle them in a similar fashion. When we engage in the faulty thinking that things will never change, we think things like this: I'll never have a great relationship. Our family will always be dysfunctional. I'll never be happy as long as I'm single. We'll never find a great teacher like we had in Pastor Smith. I'll never be happy in this family. Our child will always be difficult. I'll never have any friends. King Saul and his army believed things would never change. They would always be incapable of defeating the mighty Goliath and the Philistine army. They were wrong. God used David, a young shepherd boy, with a godly perspective and a new strategy to change things. The Apostle Peter believed things would never change. As a Jewish believer, he never entered the home of a Gentile. He had a faulty belief that Jews and Gentiles should remain separate as the church began to grow. Through a vision, however, God showed Peter that this could change, Acts 10-11. The disciples believed things would never change after Jesus was crucified and buried. They were wrong. Jesus rose from the dead and sent the Holy Spirit at Pentecost to birth a global, international church, numbering in the tens of millions. The past does not have to predict the future. Things can change for the better. The future does not have to hold more of the same. We can change. Consider the examples on the chart below. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. I'll never have a healthy relationship with the opposite sex. I can learn the skills needed for successful relationships with the opposite sex. My past doesn't have to be my future. My boss will never understand me. I can try approaching my boss in different ways. The past doesn't have to be the future. Faulty thinking, accurate thinking. Our marriage will always be hard. I can get the necessary help and coaching so my marriage becomes a pleasure. The past doesn't have to be the future. My son will always be difficult because of his learning disability. I can learn ways to better deal with my son's difficulties that can improve our relationship. The future doesn't have to be like the past. We'll never find a home. With time, patience, good stewardship, and prayer, we can find a home, perhaps even in a different we like and can afford location, or we can adjust our requirements. Our future is not limited to our past experience in searching for a home. For years I feared our church would never change. Conflicts and crisis, I believed, would always negatively impact the quality of our lives. Even today I sometimes have a visceral reaction when I hear there is trouble at church. God did not take me out of my church, but He did change me, and our church, into greater wholeness and holiness. I learned, and continue to learn, to overcome the faulty thinking that things will never change. Your future can be better than anything you experienced before. The future doesn't have to be more of the same past, hurtful patterns. Take the energy you have invested in needlessly overthinking the past and put it into making changes for the future. Busting through the wall of faulty thinking. Quitting faulty thinking demands the best of you. I describe this as busting through the wall because it is such a challenging, counterintuitive skill. It is only in the last few years that I began to focus, as part of my formation in Christ, on faulty thinking. In doing so, 3 key principles have emerged to form the foundation around which I have busted through this particular wall. 1. Know when not to follow your feelings. 2. Stop mind reading. 3. Do something different. For long-term breakthrough in this area, whether it is with a co-worker, a friend, a spouse, a parent, or a child, you must engage all 3 practices. Know when not to follow your feelings. As we noted in chapter 3, Scripture reveals God as an emotional being who feels. God is a person, having been created in His image. We too have the ability to experience emotions. Learning to listen to my feelings and to follow them when appropriate revolutionized my life in Christ and ultimately helped me to discover the quits in this book. However, there is a time and place not to follow our feelings because they can mislead us. Consider a few examples. A friend does not return your email or phone call for 3 days. You feel awful, wondering what you did or said to possibly offend her. It feels similar to how your mother withdrew from you growing up when you did something wrong. You sleep poorly, mulling over negative scenarios. You are in a meeting at work and someone aggressively disagrees with the facilitator of the meeting. You become nervous and want to run out as tension fills the room. You are unable to participate in the rest of the meeting. It feels similar to the unresolved tension at your dinner table between your parents when you were a child. Your husband says he will be home by 7 p.m. but doesn't arrive until 7:30. You are so upset that you go upstairs to your room and do not eat dinner with him. His apology and explanations mean nothing. You feel devalued and wonder if you can remain married to such an insensitive person. It feels similar to the anxiety you had as a child in depending on your father, who was often late and rarely got you to places on time. A person in your small group talks incessantly, crippling the group dynamics. You are the facilitator and know it is your responsibility to deal with this person. You don't sleep at night, imagining innumerable bad scenarios if you should do so. You feel powerless, which is similar to how you felt growing up when you were forbidden to speak up in your home. Your employee has handed in a report with errors and discrepancies. You are afraid of how he might react if you ask him about it. You follow your feelings and avoid him for the next 2 weeks. You are reminded of your brother's explosive temper tantrums whenever your parents would question him about his behavior. In all of these scenarios, the problem arises when feelings from the past hijack clear thinking in the present. The present situation feels familiar to something from the past and triggers a disproportionate response. Our feelings have been so hardwired that they override our logical thought process. Suddenly, we find ourselves overreacting. Overwhelming feelings prevent us from asking clarifying questions. What is going on here? What are the facts? What do I know to be true? What outcome do I want? Are my feelings relevant to this situation, or should I set them aside in this case? God has given us an inner guidance system to move through life, thinking and feeling. It is essential that we pay attention to our feelings. But then we must think about what to do with them. Knowing when to follow our feelings and when not to is indispensable if we are to grow up into spiritual adulthood in Christ. Stop mind reading 2. God is omniscient. He knows all things about all situations. And God alone knows what is going on in the minds of other people. Yet, we routinely play God when we make assumptions about another person or interpret a certain behavior without verifying the facts. These assumptions unleash much needless pain and confusion. In fact, the application of this one simple skill holds within it the key to preventing large-scale faulty thinking in your family, workplace, and church. Imagine your husband, who usually calls you while at work, doesn't call one day. You begin to wonder if he is angry with you. You did have an argument last night, but you thought it got resolved. You assume the worst. All day long you stew over his apparent immature behavior. How dare he give you the cold shoulder? You choose to ignore him when he arrives home and go to bed without saying good night. He remains at the kitchen table doing paperwork, not asking if anything is wrong. This confirms your hypothesis about his immaturity. Things are even worse than you thought. Who knows what tomorrow will bring, you mutter to yourself in resignation as you turn off the light. The truth, you learn later, is that he did not call because of an emergency at work. Yet you created an intricate scenario in your mind that was not true. Imagine you are part of a church ministry team planning a big event. As director, you are exchanging quite a few emails with the rest of the team. You notice that one of the team members, Ken, who used to be warm and friendly, now shoots back terse replies. You interpret this as passive-aggressive behavior and assume he must be upset with you for something. Two can play at that game. So you fire off a few short, curt emails in return. Soon thereafter, you speak to Ken on the phone. He is warm and engaging. You realize you wrongly read his mind in interpreting his emails negatively. You caused yourself unnecessary angst and murdered him in your heart. In both scenarios, you spiral downward by negatively interpreting the behavior of another and making assumptions about what they're thinking. These turn into hidden landmines in relationships. Slowly, you build up. We routinely play God when we make assumptions about another person. Resentments. You hurt yourself. You build invisible walls to keep others out. And worst of all, you quench God's spirit within you. Think of a person with whom you might be mind reading or about whom you are making assumptions you have not verified. At an appropriate time, ask them the following question: may I have permission to read your mind, or Can I check out an assumption? I have, or do I have permission to check out my thinking with you? 3. Once they say yes, consider the examples below for ways to check out your thinking and stop the mind reading. I think that you think I'm responsible for the Christmas shopping this year. Is that correct? I'm wondering if you think that I think you are a bad person for not remembering my birthday. Is that correct? I noticed that you didn't return my phone calls for a few days. That's unusual for you, so I'm wondering if there is something wrong. I'm puzzled that you gave Jane and Richard big hugs but passed me over. I'm wondering if I said or did something to upset you. I noticed you didn't call me from work today. Is everything all right, or is there still some lingering tension after our disagreement last night? The stories we tell ourselves have an enormous impact on our feelings. Consider the difference of what goes on in your mind when a friend, who agrees to meet you for dinner, is 40 minutes late. How different are your feelings when you tell yourself, maybe he had an accident driving here, or this relationship is clearly more important to me than it is to him. Each interpretation generates a different feeling. Why? Because our feelings are closely related to the story we tell ourselves about the things going on around us. To quit faulty thinking and maintain good emotional and spiritual health, we must make an intentional decision to stop mind reading and to verify our assumptions by talking to people in person instead of in our heads. Do something different. You may be familiar with Albert Einstein's oft-quoted definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Year after year I did the same thing over and over again, yet I complained that nothing was changing. Life, I assumed, would always be hard. I said yes to everyone and everything because I wanted people to think I was Superwoman. I blamed Pete for my unhappiness. I put on my happy face for others. I denied my sadness, anger, and fear. I put myself last, ignoring things that brought me life and joy. In order to break free from the deadly clutches of faulty thinking, I had to do something different. For years, I had a mantra playing in my head about the built-in hazards of being a pastor's spouse. I replayed the difficulties of hurts, staff crises, unreasonable expectations, personal growth challenges, and relationship disappointments. They became my reference point for the present and future. When I learned that the future did not have to be more of the past, I began to do some things differently. I carved out time in my life for overnight retreats with God and recreation. I pursued things that I loved, such as the outdoors. Our family moved. Pete and I went for help for our marriage. We learned skills to help us in our relationship. I set boundaries with Pete and his work. I set limits around what I would and would not do at New Life. I became realistic about how many relationships I could handle. And I said no frequently. When you find yourself caught in the quicksand of faulty thinking, ask yourself 2 questions. 1. Am I willing to stop doing the familiar thing that isn't working and try something that feels unfamiliar but may be more likely to succeed? 2. What will I regret 20 years from now if I don't get up and do something to change my situation? Each of my quits initially required that I do something radically different, and all of them felt uncomfortable in the beginning. Don't underestimate how difficult it is to take this counterintuitive, countercultural step. Often, everything in us is screaming, don't risk change. This could result in a disaster. When an unhealthy pattern is deeply ingrained in our lives, it's difficult to do something different by our own efforts alone. When I have struggled with clarity on what to do differently, I sought outside help from mentors, counselors, or spiritual directors. This has served me well over the years. We often need help from someone more experienced to help us see our situation more objectively. You may know the old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That motto needs an adaptation to if at first you don't succeed, do something different. But you will need right thinking, realistic thinking, and a plan to make changes for your future. Sailing with the wind. A couple of years ago, Pete and I had our first experience learning to sail. One of the most important things we learned was to position the sail in the right spot in order to go forward. For beginners, this is harder than it looks. When the sail is not congruent with the wind, there are three possibilities: you go around in circles, you are stuck and don't move at all, or you tip over. Faulty thinking is like having the sail in the wrong position. You can't go forward. You are stuck simply recycling the same pains, frustrations, and problems. Busting through the wall of faulty thinking launches you forward in life-transforming ways. The radical mental adjustment of quitting faulty thinking enlarges your sail. It positions your sail correctly so it can be moved freely by the wind. Ultimately, that wind is the Holy Spirit, who corrects your faulty thinking and aligns it with the truth. As we will see, courage to walk out your unique life requires examining closely the life you are now living. Are you living your life or someone else's? If you don't take responsibility for living your God-given life, it will not get lived. There is no one else in the world like you. No one. One of the greatest ways you honor and glorify God is through embracing your unrepeatable life. For this reason, 8. Quit living someone else's life. 6 months after Pete and I married, we moved to Central America for 1 year to learn Spanish. Toward the end of that year, Pete arranged for us to visit Nicaragua at the end of their civil war between the Sandinistas and the Contras. Won't this be incredible? He argued persuasively. Now we speak the language and know a family in the capital, Managua, who can show us around. I was 6 months pregnant with our first daughter, so this wasn't high on my list of vacation spots, but I went along nonetheless. Because of the war, a single bus entered the country only once a week. So on a humid Tuesday morning we boarded an old Greyhound bus from Costa Rica for the all-day trip through the mountains. Only 7 others were on that bus, all mothers who had brought their sons to Costa Rica to avoid fighting in the war. Each carried oversized suitcases brimming over with toilet paper and other goods impossible to buy in Nicaragua. After a 3-hour delay, our bus finally left. The driver drove fast, very fast. When we entered the mountainous region approaching Nicaragua, he picked up speed as if he were driving a Ferrari. The only problem was that none of the mountainous roads had guardrails. My initial discomfort with his speed quickly turned from fright to outright panic. His speed was not my speed. I stumbled toward the front to the bus, begging him in my limited Spanish to slow down. He ignored me. I pleaded with him again to no avail. I don't do well with heights, even when driving slowly or hiking on bridges. This was in another category altogether. I got down on my knees and prayed. I sat on the floor with my head between my legs. I cried. He raced on. Pete yelled at him to slow down. Nothing. Finally I prayed, okay, God, I know this is the end. Please make it quick. The bus felt out of control. The driver was oblivious both to me and the other passengers. I waited for the moment when we would lunge over a cliff. Then it happened. The bus broke down. The bus driver quickly opened the hood to examine the smoking engine, shaking his head saying, "Muy grave, very serious." He paced back and forth alongside the bus. About an hour later, a truck stopped, and he got a ride, informing us he was not coming back. I remember like it was yesterday, sitting on the grass in the middle of nowhere. We were many miles from our destination, abandoned by that bus driver. And I was experiencing one of the happiest moments of my life. I had my life back. I was thrilled. We walked, hitchhiked, and taxied our way to the capital of Nicaragua, but that adventure is a story for another time. My point here is how that experience illustrates the first 8 years of my married life, a season in which I felt like I was living everyone's life except my own. Our first 8 years of married life learning Spanish in Central America, moving to New York City, having children, starting a church in Queens were a roller coaster ride in which I was hanging on for dear life. I was in the back of an out-of-control bus driven by someone else, and I felt powerless to get off. Sadly, it took a near-death experience for me to tell Pete I wanted to get off that bus. Whose life are you living? Toward the end of his life, Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw was asked what person in history he would most like to have been. He responded by saying he would most like to have been the George Bernard Shaw he might have become but never did. How about you? Whose life are you living, your own or someone else's? The following are a few signs to help you discern if you are living someone else's life. You care too much what others think of you. You lie. You blame. You avoid confrontation. You believe false peace is better than no peace. You always put others before yourself. You say yes, even when you don't want to. You can't disagree with strong people. You are more concerned with keeping people happy at the expense of your own happiness. You are unsure of your preferences. Are you driving the bus of your life or, without really realizing it, have you surrendered the steering wheel to someone else? God calls us to get off the bus other people are driving. Jesus did. When he asserted himself in his hometown of Nazareth, declaring himself as the Messiah, his neighbors and lifelong friends literally tried to throw him off a cliff. He passed through them to walk out faithfully the life the Father had crafted for him. Luke 4:28-31. When the crowds shouted, "Hosanna, save us," and wanted to appoint Jesus as their king, he ignored their praises, knowing their agenda for his life was not his Father's will. John 6:14-15. On more than one occasion, Jesus disappointed his mother and siblings, Mark 3:21, his disciples, the crowds, and the religious leaders, John 6:41-62. The pressure on Jesus to live someone else's life was enormous. Yet, by the power of the Holy Spirit and in communion with God, he stayed true to his own life and purpose, finishing the work the Father had given him. John 17:4. In the same way, God invites you and me to ignore the distracting voices around us regardless of their source and to pursue wholeheartedly our God-given life. When we do, we and ultimately everyone around us experience a newfound freedom. Discovering yourself a life work. Church reformer and theologian John Calvin argued that there is no more exalted a description of a Christian than this: we are God's handiwork, lit, masterpiece, Ephesians 2:10. Galaxies, stars, and solar systems can knock us breathless with God's glory, Psalm 19:1, but only human beings who have experienced the miracle of a new birth are called God's masterpiece. Masterpieces aren't made by run-of-the-mill craftsmen, they require the skilled hands of a genius. They are one-of-a-kind, never-to-be-repeated gifts to the world. And that's what you are, God's one-of-a-kind, never-to-be-repeated gift to the world. God the Creator made you unique. Your beauty is a divine masterpiece. However, has been damaged by sin. The restoration process is lifelong, slow, and costly. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel is one of history's greatest artistic triumphs. From 1508 to 1512, the artist lay on his back and painted the creation, fall, and destruction of the human race by the flood. The images, however, started to fade almost immediately after he painted them. Within 100 years no one remembered what the original colors really had looked like. In 1980, a scaffold was erected and plans made to clean the ceiling of Michelangelo's priceless masterpiece. The director of the restoration project did a critical experiment using a special solution on 1 or 2 square inches at a time. For the next 12 years they cleaned the entire ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. No one expected the results to be so stunning. No one realized Michelangelo was such a master of color of azure, green, rose, lavender. Beneath centuries of grime and dirt, passionate colors lay buried. For the first time in over 450 years, people could view the masterpiece as it was originally intended, in all its color and beauty. Point 1. Stripping off the false layers and dirt that cover up your unique destiny in life is complex. Parker Palmer describes it like this: most of us arrive at a sense of self only through a long journey through alien lands. But this journey bears no resemblance to the trouble-free travel packages sold by the tourism industry. It is more akin to the ancient tradition of pilgrimage, a transformative journey to a sacred center full of hardship, darkness, and peril. Point 2. Another way to discern our distinctive life is from the perspective of discovering our sealed orders from God. Point 3. Sealed orders. Historically, referred to specific written instructions given, for example, to the captain of a ship regarding his destination or mission. They are not to be opened until a specified time or place is reached. It is as if God has given each one of us sealed orders for our lives. He invites us to open them by paying attention to the little, everyday things that give us life. Author Sheila Lynn simply and profoundly describes this process. When I am in touch with the special purpose of my life and carrying out my sealed orders, I have a profound feeling of consolation or rightness, and my whole body relaxes. I believe the sense of rightness expresses itself physiologically because the purpose of our life is built into the very cells of our body. 4. Discovering God's special purpose for your life is a process. It's impossible to anticipate everything we might encounter on this journey to an authentic self and a healthy spirituality. I've discovered 4 practices that provide trustworthy guidance for this journey. Discover your integrity, listen to your inner rhythm, set boundaries, and let go of others. As you apply these practices, you will join an adventure with God around the joy of fulfilling your special purpose on earth. Discover your integrity. The journey of living your life instead of someone else's begins when you discover your integrity. This requires recognizing and defining what is important to you. Integrity, as I use it here, is always aligned with God's values. For example, although your integrity may require you to leave an abusive relationship, it does not require that you abandon your spouse simply because you no longer feel sure you love him. When helping someone who is struggling with an inner conflict, I often ask, what is your integrity calling you to do? Most people hesitate before responding because they have rarely thought deeply about what they believe and value. They have seldom considered the dissonance between their outer and inner life, between their actions and their values. The question behind that question is this: what is important to you? If you do not take the time to answer that question, other people's fears, expectations, and agendas, or even your own fears, will drive you. You will end up defining yourself by what you are against rather than what is most significant to you. Throughout my years at New Life, honoring my integrity has repeatedly called me to evaluate my commitments. For example, I was once actively pursued to attend a milestone birthday celebration for a woman in our church. She emailed me, wrote me a letter, called, and spoke to me on a Sunday to reinforce her desire for me to attend. But I was clear about the importance of time with my family and daughters that year. During that season in my life, my integrity called me to pull back from social activities to be more present and involved with my children. This availability enabled me to have many significant conversations and teachable moments with them. I enjoyed unhurried time with them as they worked through their inner conflicts and struggles. This would not have happened had I failed to honor my integrity and bowed to pressure from others to fill up my calendar with their events. There are many other things integrity has called me to do. Honoring my integrity has called me to confront Pete on inconsistencies in himself and his leadership at New Life. Pursue additional training in emotional health, marriage issues, and theology to meet the ministry demands of helping increasing numbers of people inside and outside New Life. Create a life that reflects the values Pete and I teach around emotionally healthy spirituality. In other words, we don't want to teach what we are not living. Invest time and money consistently into our marriage. This includes getaway weekends as well as formal and informal training with mentors, relationship educators, and therapists. Craft a home that eliminates unnecessary waste by living simply. We use water bottles instead of bottled water, cloth, rather than paper napkins. We removed our television over 12 years ago and now watch only DVDs we choose to bring into our home. Stand firm, not caving in when misunderstood. When all is said and done, nothing is more important than being faithful to the will of the Father and growing in love. When I overextend myself or start doing things God has not asked me to do, my capacity to love shrinks. I often ask myself, if I say yes to this person or commitment, will I be a more, or less, loving person? Ultimately, it takes less energy to live from a place where we are actively identifying what's important to us than to live in continuous reaction to the expectations and demands of others. Listen to your inner rhythm. All creation has a natural rhythm. This is part of God's handiwork in the universe. We have night and day, winter and summer, and the great movements of seas and stars. All living things have an internal rhythm, an internal clock hardwired into them, so that they might thrive in healthy, balanced ways. Our bodies, for example, have rhythms for sleeping, eating, and breathing. When we ignore this wonderful gift from God and work 70 hours a week, skim on our sleep, skip meals, or push our bodies beyond their limits, we suffer. The same principle applies to the emotional and spiritual rhythms of our lives. If I neglect my relationship with God, if I go beyond my people limits, if I don't nurture delight and joy, my soul begins to die. I get depressed. When we do finally stop and rest, our natural rhythms reassert themselves and return us back to God's intended balance. But in the rush and pressure of our lives, it is easy to not listen or respect our rhythms. At the same time, we each have different rhythms. Our internal clocks have variations. What is optimal for you will not be optimal for those around you. Rhythm has to do with timing when it is time to engage or disengage, to remain or to transition, to be with people or be apart, to work or to rest, to play or to be serious. Jesus paid attention and honored his rhythms. He knew when it was time to move on to another town. He knew when he needed to be alone. He knew when he needed to be with 3 people or 5,000. He knew when it was time to preach and when it was time to pray. In the morning, I sense the rightness of exercising first and then being still before God. In the evening, my inner clock tells me it is best to first talk with Pete and then read before going to sleep. Pete's rhythm is the opposite of mine. He prefers being still before God first in the morning and then exercise. In the evening, his inner clock tells him it is best to read first and then talk with Jerry before going to sleep. We had to learn, over time, to respect and negotiate our different rhythms. My mother is an amazing person with an enormous capacity for extending hospitality to large numbers of people. It is not uncommon for her to have a spontaneous dinner for 20 people in her home in the summer. And she is 85 years old. Her inner rhythm frequently says it is time for a house full of people. In our early years of marriage, I tried to live her rhythms. Between out-of-town guests, small groups, socials, and our daughter's friends, a steady stream of guests poured into our home. Yet I struggled, not appreciating that my rhythms were different. Only years later did I acknowledge my need for solitude was much greater than my mother's. Honoring our different rhythms involves respecting and negotiating our needs and preferences at work, with friends, at church, in our marriage, our extended families, and even our parenting. To begin listening to your inner rhythms, consider the following questions. Do you know when it is time to be with people and when it is time to be alone? Do you know when it is time to rest or time to play? What are your most optimal work hours? How much sleep do you need? When is it time to eat? Is it time for you to wait on something or is it time to move on? How does the pace of your life feel? What can you do to establish an enjoyable routine and healthy balance in this season of your life? And finally, what are 1 or 2 changes you can make in order to get more in step with your God-given inner rhythms? Set your boundaries. With whom do you need to set boundaries? The answer is simple. With everyone. This includes your mother, father, siblings, spouse, children, friends, co-workers, even your pet. Boundaries are crucial if you are to avoid detours and follow God's path for you. Point 5. It's not bad that people want what they want. People will always want things from you: your time, your emotional support, your expertise, your money, your participation, whatever it is that you have that they want. This is normal. It also does not make them bad. We all want what we want, even nice, giving people like you. However, the fact that someone wants something from you does not necessarily mean God wants you to provide it or that He wants them to have it. Of course, it is often easier to do what others want and be who they want, but the question is, what is best in the long run? What is best in the long run is for you and me to set boundaries in order to be faithful to our God-given lives. Otherwise, we end up fused to others. Fusion is a term from physics that describes what happens when metals are melted together and lose their distinctive qualities. Emotional fusion happens when we lose our distinctiveness and lose ourselves in someone else's life. Point 6. Pete is a multi-gifted leader with countless creative ideas. He has a large capacity for juggling many responsibilities at the same time. When I fail to set my boundaries around his work, however, I begin to feel like I'm on a roller coaster ride hanging on for my life. Being married to him naturally tends to pull me into his numerous projects. If I am not careful, before I know it, I lose myself in trying to juggle his different initiatives. I have learned to recognize my limits and, therefore, choose my yes and no's prayerfully and thoughtfully. Think over your commitments in your church community and in your marriage, with friends, children, neighbors, co-workers, and extended family members. What problems or commitments might you have taken on that God never intended? In what relationships do you need to establish a healthier boundary today? What might that look like? What support will you need in prayer and from others? How can you keep this boundary from becoming a wall that keeps you from loving others? Remember, we set boundaries to love people well. And in setting ourselves free to live our life, we are setting those around us free as well. Let go of others. To quit living someone else's life requires not only healthy boundaries with others, but also not trying to run other people's lives. In letting go, I do not run interference in the lives of others. Controlling the lives of others takes time and energy. It also takes the focus off your own life. When others think, feel, and act differently than we do, we tend to become anxious. This creates a gravitational pull to want to control them. If you're a parent, you know how challenging this can be. I nursed, fed, clothed, and kept our 4 daughters alive throughout their childhoods. They literally depended on me for their lives, and I naturally thought of them as an extension of myself. Yet, one of my God-given tasks is to intentionally nurture their separateness from me. I remember when, in high school, one of my daughters wanted to spend $85 on a pair of shoes. I said, "That's crazy. Please don't spend that much money on one pair of shoes." I felt stressed and anxious. Where was this going to lead? She was violating so many of my values about good management and budgeting of money. The question of how many pairs of shoes are morally appropriate for one person to own, and the moral correctness of spending so much money on one pair of shoes. Despite my protests, she assured me they were a good investment. My daughter did buy those shoes and eventually handed them down to me. Now, 6 years later, they remain among my favorite and most frequently worn shoes. I remember thinking, maybe I can learn some things about quality shopping from my daughter. This was an important lesson for me. Her preferences are not only different from but sometimes wiser than mine. Letting go and respecting differences with our children is an ongoing process. Just because I am cold does not mean they are cold. Just because I am thirsty on a hot day does not mean they are thirsty. I may love the outdoors and exercising, but that does not mean they do. I preferred to paint their room pink and wanted our daughters to learn a musical instrument. They wanted different color schemes for their bedrooms and showed little interest in music lessons. As children become teenagers and young adults, letting go requires releasing increasing amounts of control over whom they date and marry, their choice of careers, what colleges they attend, and their decisions about following Christ. Please do not misunderstand. I believe parents play a vital role in coaching children toward good choices. If a child is involved in behavior that is hurting them or others, it is a parent's responsibility to intervene. But there are many areas of life where our kids make choices that aren't wrong. they are simply different from the ones we might make. Finally, when they are adults, and perhaps married, we are challenged to watch them raise their children differently than we raised them. We do our best to make a mature transition from being their parents to being their peers, giving advice and counsel only when asked. Letting others go, however, crosses over into more areas of life than just parenting. For example, we think people should know how to dress or act in church and how to nurture their spiritual lives. People make choices to leave our spiritual community and join another. We can become resentful, or we can appreciate that their journey is different from ours. People see political and international issues differently than I do. I can listen and ask questions, seeking to understand, or I can become angry at what I perceive as narrowness. One of the litmus tests to discern my spiritual growth in letting go is to detect when traces of resentment and judgmentalism prevail in my heart rather than an appreciation of differences. I can pronounce, well, if Pete wants to spend a beautiful Saturday in a library reading a book, that's his choice. I won't say a word, even though he is missing out on God's gift of being outside. Or I can pause and genuinely appreciate how unique he is. I am sad that I am going on a hike alone this afternoon, but Pete's ability to learn and read in so many diverse areas is a wonder to behold. When, where, and with whom do you need to let go? When are you tempted to think you know best when it is really only a matter of preference? Name 1 or 2 areas where you can let go of a decision someone made that you are anxious about. Prayerfully commit this person and situation to the Lord. How might God be using this process of letting go to prepare you for something new He has for you? Write your manifesto. A few years back I wrote my manifesto, a public declaration of my beliefs and values, as the culmination of a series of retreats I had been involved in over a 2-year period. Drawing from a compilation of poems, essays, and scriptures, I attempted to summarize and clarify my 30-year journey with Christ. Like putting together the pieces of a puzzle, I began to see the larger picture of my life, past, present, and future. I sensed that the unique colors of my own personal journey longed to shine forth through layers of old paint covering over my true self in Christ. I slowly put these down on paper and later pinned it on the wall in front of my desk, where it remains to this day. I am a work in progress. Yet it turned out to be another important step to quit living someone else's life and to take up my own. This is my personal manifesto, expressing my beliefs and values. You may want to craft your own, but I share these with you to give you an idea of the direction you may want to go in. These truths were custom fit to a particular stage in my journey, but they may spark ways in which God wants to uniquely speak to you in yours. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength by loving what you love. Point 7. Love your neighbor not better than yourself, not above yourself, but as yourself. Walk humbly, love mercy, and do justice. See Micah 6:8, and you don't have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert to do so. 8. Taste and see that the Lord is good by enjoying the joy of marriage, the love and laughter of family, good food and drink, the warmth of the sun, the feel of your body gliding through the water, the fragrance and colors of herbs and flowers, a star-filled night, and the image of God in every person. Respect your God-given limits and grow through your false self limits, or you can do others great damage. Point 9. Treat silence as a best friend. When the going gets rough, turn to wonder. Be quick to ask questions and be slow to advise. My first work is to set my heart at rest, to be still and know that He is God. There are treasures in darkness. It holdeth riches past computing. 10. She who is not happy cannot help many people. Remember the wisdom of the deer. Just be, imperfections and all. Point 11. Treat every thought and feeling, no matter how joyful or dark, as a guest, because each one has been sent to guide me. Point 12. Remember the loaves and the fishes. God is the source of my life. John 6:1, 13. Remember the salmon, don't turn away from the hit, turn toward it to experience mystery and grace. This final line in my manifesto reminds me that deciding to quit Living someone else's life often feels like that of a salmon swimming against a powerful current. When salmons prepare to mate, they swim upstream, up waterfalls seeming to defy gravity. Salmon somehow know how to turn their undersides from center to tail into the powerful current coming at them. It hits them squarely, and the impact then launches them out and farther up the waterfall. They do this over and over again until they actually climb over the waterfall. The particular way they lean into the current actually bounces them farther and farther up in the air. From a distance, it seems as if these fish are actually flying. When you discover your integrity, listen to your inner rhythms. Set boundaries, and let go. Like the salmon, you push against strong currents in yourself and in our culture. The miracle is that when you do these things, you climb up and over a powerful waterfall that threatens to sweep you away. And you enter into the joy of your own beautifully God-given life, where you now carry out your own God-given sealed orders. Choose to live divided no more. 13. You may have come to this book looking for solutions to some problems. Perhaps you were captured by the title The Emotionally Healthy Woman, secretly hoping it would give you 3 easy steps to become whole. My interest, however, has been in providing you with a fresh vision for transformation in Christ and a few powerful principles for rethinking misunderstood biblical truths. I am, thankfully, a very different person from what I was when I first quit our church many years ago. It has been enormously liberating to stop pretending and to choose to do something different, to choose life over death. My greatest goal is authentic love of God, myself, and others. Practicing these 8 quits has been one of the most significant means to that end. And I will continue to practice them, allowing God to use them to transform me the rest of my life. The quits brought me out of illusion into reality, out of darkness into light, out of deception into truth, out of inner bondage into interior freedom, out of sadness into joy, out of fear into peace, out of hate into love, out of blindness into sight. I don't know many things, but as the blind man who received his sight from Jesus said, "One thing I do know. I was blind but now I see." John 9:25. My invitation, in closing, is to invite you to make a Rosa Parks decision regarding your life today, to become the unique woman God has crafted you to be. As an African American woman living in the segregated South in the 1950s, Rosa Parks was tired of pretending everything was fine when it was not. Quaker author Parker J. Palmer recounts her story as follows. On December 1, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks did something she was not supposed to do. She sat down at the front of a bus in one of the seats reserved for whites, a dangerous, daring, and provocative act in a racist society. When asked, "Why did you sit down at the front of the bus that day?" Rosa Parks did not say that she sat down to launch a movement. She said, "I sat down because I was tired." She meant that her soul was tired, her heart was tired, her whole being was tired. 14. Rosa Parks made a decision that day to live divided no more. She would no longer live on the outside what contradicted the truth of her integrity on the inside. She refused to smile on the outside while being set on the inside. This is what I pray that you also will choose to do. May you take hold of God's courage to live divided no more, discovering the Spirit's supernatural power that yearns to break into your life and birth that